the call to take responsibility in the kingdom will look like irresponsibility in the society.
For sure. Okay, here we are. Brave Cities, Gray Pages, episode Who Knows?
Yeah, who knows? Don't do that.
Um, but what is significant is, are you about to read something?
No.
What is significant is we're sitting with our host, Dr. John Dangler, who is
Bishop John Dangler.
who is sitting in his office in Tampa, Florida. That we are 2 days after Hurricane Milton.
Yep.
Just what, 2 weeks after Hurricane Helene, or is it even less than 2 weeks?
Nah, yeah, it's about 2 weeks.
Yeah. So within 2.5 weeks, the kind of coastal cities of South Florida have been devastated by these two back-to-back hurricanes, and we just felt like there were some significant things we wanted to talk about. One, just how it feels being in this, but also we've been thinking a lot about the greatest commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets are summed up in that one. We've been thinking about what it means to consider others more significant than yourself. I mean, the common human response for a crisis like this is to hit the road, and nothing's wrong with that at all. In fact, I
Especially
think
if you're fleeing a Cat 5
yeah,
down the highway or something like that.
yeah, I would think that anyone would say it's a wise move to get out of Dodge. But the thing about John and a few of our other friends that I've known in this area for years now, every time a storm like this seems to be brewing, they all kind of come together. The last thing they think of is leaving.
Yeah.
They all say, no, we got our neighbors here. I've been communicating with several people in the area. Our friend Lucas, who's kind of a part of running the Tampa Underground, Jeremy Stevens, who's a good friend who started Tampa Underground, Stacy Gaskins. I've been talking to all of you guys, and everybody's saying the same thing. Like, this is when it's most important for us to be here and to be present. And so I just found all of this exhilarating in my spirit. At least I didn't want to necessarily come down there and be with you guys through the hurricane, but
I'm generally out. I'm hitting the road on a Cat 1, but
That's just rain.
yeah. I don't even know, is there a thing as a Cat 1?
Yes,
So
there is. That's when something goes from tropical storm to hurricane.
What's going on, man? Like, what's all happening? You've already given us a little rundown of the devastation that's happened, so maybe we can cut that in.
Yep.
But let's just talk about all of it. And I know that your mind's been going into all kind of different places, like my own home, my own life, my own family, because your whole family's there. But also like the devastation that is going to increase and come as future events happen. I want you to guide the whole apocalypse, hurricane, destruction, wars conversation this morning, and how Brave Cities paradigm applies to all this.
That's all. Just
yeah, no big deal. Well, I'll do my best. I will say I am sitting in my office recording with you guys, and there's power and internet. I couldn't believe it this morning when I came here. This is the only place. So I actually still have power at my house, but no internet. Most other places have no power, no internet. I was a little scrambling trying to see, like, could I get on this call with you guys?
Could we even do one today? Yeah.
And I'm really glad to, super grateful that this building is operational, because even just outside the door, we have partners from Mutual Aid Disaster Relief collecting donations. We do have a bunch of food we got to clear out because it sat in fridges and freezers that got shut down for a few days. So that's gross. But yeah, the apocalypse I think is an interesting lens for this, man, because, well, it does feel like when like you said, like people are getting out of town, there is a sense that you're about to face the apocalypse. Like this is the end. The way that's traditionally used, right? And then at some level too, like there's this is the end for some folks, like for their
Right.
homes, for their lives
Lives.
that they know, like it's gonna uproot and such a disaster. But the actual word has always stood out to me as like interesting as like meaning to unveil. And like that's what the word apocalypse means. It means that's why revelation is called revelation. It's like it's to pull the veil, to make known, to let you see. And so one of the things I've really found interesting, like we went through COVID or whatever, but like a hurricane is a common version of this. Even beforehand, it's an apocalypse. It unveils what's going on in folks. Like when you go to Home Depot or you go to the grocery store, you've got like versions of this where you've got people ready to fist fight over the last crate of water, or the last plywood to board up their windows. And people, I mean, and by the way, I tried to swing by Home Depot. There was like not a scrap of wood in the place, beforehand, but like there's people flicking each other off, cutting each other off in traffic. It gets like ugly intense out of just desperation and a clinging to survival.
Pre-apocalypse.
Yeah.
Pre and post. I mean, but yeah, like it's during it's like what's unveiled, I think,
Right.
is this character. And yet at the same time, you got people pulling their water and putting it in people's trunks that aren't able to get any. You've got people like mutual aid, disaster relief coming together. You've got people like those phone calls you said where I'm like, I gotta be here for my neighbors. Like, what if something happens to Miss Mary down the street? And like, there's this other side of the coin where it's actually like super heartwarming to see this like very human response where people get real caring, something you dream to see all the time.
Yeah.
In the disaster that is every day, this storm that is, poverty and fatherlessness and all the things that our cities are facing. But there's something really acute when a storm comes. So I'll like pause there if there's anything, but like that's something really fascinating to me observing this. It's like it really sorts the sheep and the goats a little bit.
Yeah.
In a pretty powerful way. And I don't think it's just temperamental.
I just, it's a great reminder that, because we're able to record today and we can check the news and see what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Like what a gift that is to have awareness of what's going on. And the fact you can see that the Milton is coming in about 6 minutes offshore. Like that is such an amazing thing to think that through the course of history, life was apocalyptic for everybody. Like they were from volcanoes to and they had no way to communicate. So they just had to figure out what the heck are we supposed, especially those that were God followers.
Mm-hmm.
I remember we hear the stories of, early monastic groups. If the plague was coming in to Prague in, 14th century or 6th century and taking out everybody, certain monastic communities, kind of like your network there in Tampa, they specifically decided to stay and go in when everybody's fleeing to get out. And what that unique call of the Christian is, it's pretty amazing.
I also was thinking a lot about just like it's very hard to think about living as if it was your last day always. Like we see that in the early church, right? Like it's like you read the early church and it's like, I mean, they legitimately don't think they're coming to the end of their days, right? This is the final hours and we need to hurry up. We need to work hard. We need to here we are thousands of years later. It's really hard for us to live in a way where that's functionally like at play in our lives, where it's like you can live like it's your last day. That's a great trope. That's a great like cliche to say, but like in reality, we want savings. We want to plan for the future. We don't have any sense that the end is nigh, right? And so there it's hard to shift into that kind of like apocalyptic kind of frame of mind. And yet I do think there's something substantially important about it, both in what it unveils, but also in the posture it creates in us as well, where we're like, do not worry for the morrow. It has enough worries of its own. Today has enough trouble of its own. Like that's something that's like, can we spend ourselves on behalf of those in need around us today? One of the things on another piece of this that's been tough is realizing coordination. So like, because you have a network of people that want to help, churches that want to help, people that want to volunteer, we've been trying to get like a thread of communication through all these different groups to kind of coordinate. We started this a few days even before the storm came. Like, all right, when it hits, like there's gonna be work to do. So how are we gonna be able to like do this? And what I'm realizing is it's very hard to get information, at least at this time. Like I got on a call with the county and leadership yesterday, which is the day after the storm. And they're like, yeah, there's like, stand by. There's nothing we can tell you yet because
Yeah.
we have to do like damage assessment. So we can't even tell you where acute need is or where you could take your chainsaws or where you guys with boats can go. And like, but meanwhile, there are rescues happening where people are literally neighborhoods that we drive through in the city where they're having to boat out people out of these assisted living facilities and out of these places. They're going in and rescuing people that are stranded in flooded out places. But it's tough. It's like everyone kind of then turns and goes, what do I do? You know, you hear that in like a 911 scenario, like everyone can stand around and be like, oh, no one like knows what to do or take responsibility. But if one person steps up and goes, call 911, do this, grab this, whatever, things start moving. And it actually is a real role and a real service. But I've found it quite difficult because I don't know what the hell to do.
Yeah.
You know, other than to point to the thing that you always do. And I don't mean like distribute groceries. I mean, like, you constantly point people to like, look, love your neighbor, like look out for the, like, so immediately we're like, look out for your block, see if someone on your street needs your generator or you can help cut up something. Or like after this, I'm going to go help cut up a tree that's laying across someone's power lines so that hopefully Tico can restore service over there and like kind of do what you can on a personal level. But it's the coordination piece is really tricky. And it's something, you know, we just talked to Brian about coordination and it's like, I can't stop thinking about how important it is, especially in an acute moment like this.
So you were saying something about getting on the phone and just calling all of the organizers or leaders, overseers of church buildings and saying, hey, what are we doing? Like, what's your thought there? Talk about that.
Yeah. So I haven't made this call yet. I just like was just talking with some of the folks outside. Like, what do we know is needed? Right. Well, one of the things we know is needed is prepared foods because no one can store or cook. So distributing like, here's a burrito is I'm going to make some calls around some potential food sources that people can be cooking food that we can take out, like nice portable handheld type stuff. But the other thing is like shelter. Like there's like so many people are getting displaced. Like they're without roofs, without home, flooded out. And so we keep like wondering like, where are these people going? And one of the guys was saying, man, I called like every hotel in town last night. There's no such thing as a room. Like you can't get inside somewhere. And so we're like, well, what can we do? And I'm going to start making some calls because we have all these church buildings around. And it's funny how like one of the guys that was in the, that works with mutual aid actually said like, you know, it's an opportunity to make every sermon they preach from here on out more meaningful, right? Like is like opening up these spaces. So we're going to ask like, are there buildings? Are there, you know, gymnasiums? Are there places?
Kitchens.
And kitchens. And then even like, honestly, even yards, if people can come set up tents, you know, we can make do with whatever we can do. But right now it's like, we're not really sure where to direct people. And so I got to make some calls and see if anyone will raise their hand and say like, we'll make our space available or our church building has power and can run the AC and let people into like our fellowship hall or something like that. And so we're, you know, hoping that we can get a decent response to that. And then also, I don't know where all these are located, but like wherever they're located, we got to make do with whatever we can get folks to.
I was talking to a longtime friend this week, honestly, because I needed a little encouragement. And I was doing sort of a 20-year assessment of my life. So I'm 43, and I realized one day I was working on a project, and I'm spending a lot of time by myself right now working on this this housing project for a local family, and kind of provides me a lot of time to think, but I also get in my head, and um, I really felt like I was doing almost like a forensic study of the past 2 decades of my life, because I realized that it was 20 years ago when I had an experience. I had been following Jesus, like truly following Jesus, for 4 years. And I had an experience in inner city Mobile that kind of paved a way to me interpreting Matthew 25 in the way that's shaped my life. Isaiah 58 and Matthew 25 have kind of shaped my life. Matthew 25, Jesus saying, if you want me, I'm among the poor. Isaiah 58 saying, it's not the fast that I desire that you do these things, and that, and then your light will rise as the noonday, right? So what you find, and I'd love to hear y'all's experience in this too, and then tie it to all of this, John. But what you find is that early on, there's a lot of passionate people. I mean, think of weren't you like a navigator or something? What was yours?
A Youth for Christ guy.
YFC. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so you think of your YFC days, John, you think of your InterVarsity days, and I mean, there's no shoulder room. Like the amount of people that are in for the fight is so exciting and so exhilarating to realize you're a part of a story, a 2 to 10,000-year-old story, along with others that look and think and laugh and whatever, like you do, enjoy the things that you do. The second, portion of the story, you move into actual adulthood and you realize that number decreases a bit.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. C.S. Lewis calls it a wartime lifestyle. And that wartime lifestyle becomes a lot less appealing when you have mortgages and bills and mouths to feed other than your own. When you have a spouse that's looking to you for protection and for security. So that number,
Thursday night pickleball community wants you to show up.
yeah,
Stuff like
that's right. And then I break it into 3 seasons myself that I've been in. You've clearly been in far more.
4 or 5 seasons.
But then you do good, bad, or indifferent. Like, I'm not even saying this is the normal pathway. It seems to be common. But into your 40s, that number has dwindled significantly, where you start to feel pretty alone. You start to go, man,
It's actually hard to find anybody to shoulder up.
And here's the thing. You start to go, did I miss something?
Yeah, am I the dummy?
Like, am I in this too long? And I'm having this conversation with my buddy saying, look, I don't want any advice.
It's the 2 guys meeting eyeballs as some are fleeing Prague and some are walking into Prague.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
that little moment where they look at each other.
Who's the guy that said, I want to be at the gates of hell? The missionary, he said, like, put me right at the doorstep of hell.
I know what you're talking about.
Do y'all know what I'm talking? I'll find it before the end of the convo today. I think it might have been Adoniram Judson. I can't remember who said this, but it was kind of his life's mantra is, wherever hell is, that's where I want to be. I want to storm the gates of hell, with the good news of Jesus. So I'm bringing this all to a head with you, John, in this conversation, but also with all of us to say, like, this is the wartime lifestyle is to run into the cannon fire, to run into the chaos, and to say, I'm here to bring good news. It seems like, and I might even be as bold and I don't know, kind of judgmental sounding, but I certainly don't mean it this way because I would be condemning my own self to say it seems like the way of empire, or the way that's different than what Jesus taught us, is to run away from, to get out of, to exclude and find safety and security and ease in this life, to go look at all that I've gained, look at my barns, and I have to build actually bigger barns to store all of my stuff and all of my blessing. This is Luke 12. Y'all know what I'm talking about,
Yep.
the parable of the whatever. So I'm wrestling with this myself because I need it's starting to feel like almost daily reminders that no, this is what Jesus taught us. We run into the cannon fire when we hear the sound of it. We don't run from the hurricane. We find the ones that can't navigate it, that can't leave, because that's the thing about what evacuation.
A lot
Yeah.
of people can't go.
Where are the poor going to evacuate to?
Bro,
To
it's such a problem. I mean, even just it actually is a very practical challenge to evacuate. Like, can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, that's right. Like, where are you going to stay? But then also, like, if you saw, and maybe you did see in the national news, the traffic, like from South and Central Florida to get out of Florida. So, like, that would take you 5 hours just on a normal day. It was 3x that, and they had opened up the like shoulders of the road as lanes, which made me wonder, like, where are people pulling off? Because there was no gas in the state. So you
Right.
had to have like a truck or a vehicle with gas in the back, or you're not getting, like, how are you going to get out?
Yeah.
And the thing that I'm like, to me, it seems like more scary is being stuck on the interstate in between all these cars in a traffic jam and not able to go anywhere. And it's too late at that point. Right. But like, there's a real financial burden to being able to get out. Now, a lot of evacuation doesn't mean leave the state though. So there are a lot of people that evacuation, like, so proper evacuation here is different zones. So they have like these different flood zones, and zone A and B are what got evacuated here in Tampa. A and B are low lying coastal areas where they expect storm surge. Like, you're going to die if you stay in these areas. I do know someone that stayed in B, and their house is flooded out. They did survive it. It only came up so far because the storm surge was minimal compared to what they expected. Had we
Right.
gotten what they thought it was going to be,
He's a goner.
he'd have been gone. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so people had to evacuate out of those areas. I mean, they were literally like going around on loudspeakers. Now, interestingly enough, most of those are pretty well off areas because they're coastal,
Right.
because they're the beach fronts, they're the nicer areas of town.
So what is the framework? Like, why do we, how is this experience shaping anything of your, like, nothing seems to have changed for you? When I think about you and whatever, I know your life, so I know we're all on a journey, but when I think about you, you're just living your normal life today. You're doing what you do every day.
For the most part, except for this particulars. Yeah, that's right. So it's like you do what you do every day, but the particulars got all shifted around because there's things that can't happen that normally happen. Like our bike shop can't be open because there's a flood all the way around it, right? Like
You're
that's not even
saying-
up.
No, no, no.
You're saying he gives his life to help those.
That's what I'm saying.
that-
Yeah. The particulars
just
change,
a
but the
different-
meta is it's actually a phenomenal opportunity to do what you've always done in a way that maybe matters acutely. And this is what the coordination challenge is, because also all of a sudden where you said like early on, there's lots of passionate people ready to go. Well, then maybe there's not, and you find yourself alone because of like the move away from the kind of wartime ethic or whatever. But then something like this happens, and all of a sudden, well, first of all, almost everybody's job is shut down. Almost everybody doesn't have power. Almost everybody that is in good shape is super grateful and ready to like help someone out. And so now there actually could be an army of people deployed if you knew how to do that. But where what really is hard is where you're like, well, it's been so long since I've had this kind of help, and
Right.
I don't know this terrain. So like, it's easy to go do what you always do, except when they're not people that are always doing it. That's actually really challenging, to be honest. Like but yeah, that's right. We're not doing anything different in any fundamental way.
I always wonder, like, just at a psychological level, what is it? Because you meet people, and some of them believe in God, and some of them don't, but there's just some people that can't not help everybody. And they're going to be out there and they're going to stay up all night helping rescue people. And there are people that just don't.
Well, one thing we say all the time is I've been spending time with a guy here locally that's very, very suspect of whether or not God is real. And I tell him a lot, like, I understand that you don't believe in God, but it's very clear you believe in the kingdom. So I've yet to meet a person that doesn't believe in the kingdom. I think their understanding of Jesus, soteriology, the theology of creator God, there's a struggle there. But the reason that these so-called people, so many are just can't not help others, is because they do have a deep rooted longing for the
Like a
kingdom.
cosmic ethic as well, you know. I do think also, you know, my buddy Dave Runyon wrote a book called Art of Neighboring, and he did it because he asked the mayor of Denver, like, hey, how if the church, and he actually said, I don't know if the church will, but if the church could help the city of Denver, what could we possibly actually do to help you guys? And the mayor quickly said, oh, if you would just be good neighbors, it would take care about 85%
Right.
of all the stuff we ever go through. So even if you can't get great coordination, if the church and people outside the church just went, we'll at least make sure these 7 houses.
Yep.
It would actually take care of most of the
But
problem.
could we amend a little bit of that? I don't think it negates that concept.
Hmm.
But that's a problematic concept when the majority of the committed church is posturing itself to be inaccessible to the poor.
That's right. Their neighbors are fine. Like maybe not, obviously everybody's human and they're going to have
Maybe not in
good
this.
neighbors in any context, but they're not in the areas of acute need to love the vulnerable neighbors, like the neighbors that are in desperate need, like around our city right now, are in desperate need next to each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Like they're all in desperate need. You actually need to come from another area of town.
This is kind of what I'm trying to get at is an apocalyptic event causes it galvanizes so many people, especially it seems to me, especially people of faith, but it galvanizes so many people to live an apocalyptic lifestyle, to say, I'm not thinking about my son's basketball career or my daughter's GPA or my uncle who is near death and might leave millions to the family, or my job security or my promotion or that boat that I really want to buy. Like, people start to think within a wartime mindset. I want to help. But here's where I'm kind of trying to get is at the end of it all, there's still a real issue with the fact that we've been convinced that the better play for our lives is to get as far away from pain as we can. To isolate and insulate ourselves from the poverty and what in a lot of ways, that's why people would say like the hood is war. The hood is a battlefield because they do live a wartime lifestyle every day.
Yep.
So help kind of navigate that a little bit, John, because what I'm wanting to do is at least cause some question within the hearts of anybody who listens to this is, are you sure that was the best move for you to take your family or your roommates or whatever and just get as far away from the poor and the hurting as you can? I'm not saying it's not sometimes a good move. I'm saying for it to happen as often as it does.
You know, when you were talking about earlier, like being young and there's a bunch of passionate people ready for the fight, and you were setting up this kind of like war, you used to call it a wartime lifestyle. And then over time, you said it gets harder and harder because you're worried about your mortgage or your spouse. And I was going to interrupt, but I was like, I'll let you keep going. But like, that is technically the opposite of wartime ethics, right? So like the early church, there's even the let's say the idea of like celibacy or not being given in marriage or not having children, like a lot of these things were related to the end. Like we do not get caught up in civilian affairs because we don't have time for that stuff. We're not going to be around, right? Well, now time plays out and we start losing a grip on that. And so what you're pointing out is like when we have these moments of crisis, moments of the end, whether it be a hurricane or buildings taken down in certain, or something like a pandemic, it's like people really come together and start living in a way where they're not worrying about their kids' basketball game. And what it reminds me of, and I think this is interesting, is all of us, whether you've lived through one of those, probably everyone has lived through something like that. But if you haven't, one of the things I think most people have lived through is just grief. And I think it maps to this a little bit. So like, when let's say you lose a spouse, a dear loved one, a child even, and you get the grip that comes over you of pain and grief. Like it is an encounter with a power greater than yourself that has its way with you. And in most of our experiences, I would bet all of our experiences, we go, man, I don't care about my grades. I don't care about how I look. I don't care about what I eat. I don't care about what you think of me. I don't care about this stupid podcast. I don't care about anything because of this thing that has such a grip on me, right? And I think grief resembles the kind of, it's like a moment, it's like this apocalyptic thing. And what I would argue is the gift of grief is that it is the moment of the most clarity and wisdom in your entire life, where all of a sudden you are snapped out of the spell of everything you spend all of your time, you piss all of your time and attention away on, worrying about your bank account and what people think and like your Instagram followers or all of this dumb stuff. And all of a sudden grief will snap you out of it. And I think apocalypse or catastrophic events have a very similar effect. And what's interesting is I think your memory proves this. So if I just said to you, like, what'd you do last Tuesday? Chances are, without looking at your calendar, you have no idea.
Yeah.
You're like, I don't know.
Yesterday, but yeah.
What?
That's
true of yesterday. No,
that's
true. Right. Yeah. The workaday life, it's just like, I don't know. It goes on without happening. But then what you do retain is, so when you would remember what happened on Tuesday, or in my case, Wednesday, like I know what I did Tuesday because there was a hurricane coming on Wednesday. So I was boarding up windows. I was checking on friends. I was making sure people had somewhere to go. And because there was crisis, because the daily domestic life was broken, I know exactly what I was doing. And your memory retains the ruptures. Your memory retains the crises, and it refuses to retain the unimportant events of every single day of your life, which I think is like worth really pondering.
Totally.
And so the question I hear embedded in this is like, well, how can this be sustained? Because when I look around and go, man, this is awesome. Let's activate, let's get churches opening their doors to people in without homes, and let's get people serving food, and let's get people chopping up neighbors' trees and helping like do all this stuff. And then, but when the storm passes, we we want to go back to the way things were. And we really do. And so the question is like, how do we sustain it? And this is where I think the question that you're asking is really important about where you choose to live. Because I would actually argue that if you can make a discipline, and this is a big part of my life, it's why I've got like little skulls around and things like that, where I'm like, if I can make looking death in the face a daily discipline, if I can if I can make illness and poverty common in my life, if I can make, like we talked about before, if I could make my home at the gates of hell, then these things never leave. And you always
you become a storm chaser in a lot of ways. Like
that's a good way to put it. You're a storm chaser. I like that. I like
you
that.
just stay in the war. The war is always happening somewhere. It's always a storm. And that is that, like, people always do ask psychologically, well, how do I stay this committed? But you can't just make your mind, but you can change your environment that makes your mind. I mean, this is why we've put so much emphasis on brave cities being given to places that don't have access.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, that's so good, John.
Well,
this is why I always, by the way, just to like put a point on this, you can go back and look at when we actually talked about this, but this is why the orthotopic matters so much to me. Like, it's because I do think it's the place you put yourself that makes all of the other things we care about possible.
I think, bro, like, by the way, for anybody that's interested, the quote I was thinking about was from I think it's a missionary named C.T. Studd, and he said
He had to be from Texas.
he said
That's a Texas name.
Some wish to live within the sound of a chapel bell. I wish to run a rescue mission within a yard of hell. We've talked about this in a previous podcast because we kind of believe that Jesus was giving us a little clue when he told Peter, on this rock I will build my church, when he was talking about a mountain that's described as the gates of hell. Here's the thought that I want to land is in every virtue that we navigate, and paint it with this, like place it under this umbrella. We've said before, and I really kind of fundamentally believe this, that all of Jesus's teachings had very little to do with right and wrong, but it had everything to do with freedom and liberation. So he wanted to liberate us. So he taught us that pride, jealousy, wandering eyes,
storing up things,
storing up treasures on earth. He was teaching us about bondage. He was saying, I've seen the other dimension. You don't want what you think you want. Okay. So then we buy into this faith journey. And even now, a listener could say, these guys are trying to persuade us into the missional lifestyle. I can't think of more of a waste of time for me trying to persuade someone into the missional lifestyle. If you read our book, Brave Cities, the last thing that Hugh and I are trying to do, or John, our ghostwriter, is trying to do, is persuade someone into the missional lifestyle. What we're trying to do is to say, if you long for the kingdom and the missional life, here are some thoughts to liberate you into that
Mhm.
effort, into that practice. So this is the thought today, is where you live. And John says it all the time. You call it your orthotopic, right? Will you just
Mhm.
define that real quick?
Yeah, so ortho means straight, right? So we use it in orthodox, which means right thinking, orthopathos, right feeling, orthopraxy, right doing. And then topic just means place, like you use like a topical cream, you put it on a certain spot. So
Mhm.
orthotopic is just the idea that there's a right place. And I would argue that the right place is among pain and suffering and the poor. And it's in that place that demands righteous action. It's in
So
that
we
place
call it
from the
we
perspective.
call it so often intentional living.
Mhm.
And again, this is not an original concept. It could have, its origins could even be before this, but you could argue, Old Testament stories of Abraham or Isaac or Jacob. You certainly could argue Jesus's teaching on, I will build my church at the gates of hell. On this rock, I will build my church. The idea is, first and foremost, we will go where God tells us to go. As a people, we will just go where God tells us to go. I think that that's easier said than done.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of times we're unsure. But here's the thing. The default choice in uncertainty is safety, security, and luxury. And I would say, if you want the missional life, if you don't, you're good. You're safe. You're like, God loves you. You're not judged. So get into that in a second. But if you want it, the default move is to be near the poor and the hurting. There's a step, there's one that supersedes that. And I believe in it. The superseding thought is, God, if you could guide us, we'll go wherever you say. If that's a palace in Egypt, if that's the freaking White House, if that's some suburb or some, for example, Hugh's current story involves a beautiful 80-acre farm where they're ministering to so many people all over our city. We'll do that. We'll go where you guide us. But the default move is, if we have not heard your voice clearly, we're going to be near the gates of hell. If you want the missional life, that's what I'm trying to get to
And
right
even
now,
more
John.
what you're saying, if you want, as you work towards freedom, you'll be freer there than you will trying to keep building stuff up.
And I just don't know. I'm trying to understand, with all my brothers and sisters that I love so much, the ones that are listening to this that I don't even know, why is it? What am I missing that our default move? You know how people will say, like, the adage, John, like the people will say, you're on the front lines.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, you must be called to something
Yes,
unique.
if that's a special calling.
It's like, that's the special calling. I'm going, no. No, the special calling is to leave the front lines. That would be the voice of God saying, come out of that.
Take one for the team.
Take one for the team and go live in this
Work some admin job to
upper class suburb. And I do not doubt that God could lead you to that. But I'm saying, if you want the missional life, your orthotopic might be the most significant of the four orthos. It will shape your orthodoxy, your orthopraxis, and whatever the other ortho is. What's the fourth one? What am I missing?
I didn't hear the orthodoxy, orthopraxy, orthopathos, orthotopic.
Orthopathos. Yeah. I think the orthotopic could potentially shape everything else.
Couple thoughts. Well, first of all, and I don't have much to say on this, but the idea of the front lines, I've heard that before, definitely. But when you just said it, something just jumped out to me about it is that it implies something behind the front lines, which, and I'm not a military guy. I don't know this, but I'm like, behind the front lines, there's probably support services for the front lines that are providing combat forces what they need for the fight that they're in. There's probably training going on and the combat area, a non-combat area behind the arena of conflict where people are preparing to go to the front lines to replace someone who fell. And so interestingly, I've never thought about this. It might be worth digging into. I'm going to think about this through the day, but like that you're on the front lines, especially among like the body of Christ, implies like, and that's fine. Like maybe there is like, you're like in the thick of it and it's a recognition like I'm not, but the implication would be, well, that would say like if we're on the same, we're from the same, community or from the same, I don't know what you would call that, but like that you're then by implication, you're one of these, you're training, you're on you're on recovery from your last round on the front lines in some sort of hospital type thing, or you're helping with management or resourcing or training to be up next. And anyway, I just think that's a pretty interesting thought. But I wanted to throw out one other thing as you were talking about this, Jesus not talking about right and wrong, but about freedom and liberation. And I think that's really an interesting thought. And I think it's right. And at the fundamental thing, what comes to mind is Dietrich Bonhoeffer saying, when Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die. But I do think the idea, there is something around the orientation to death, because I do think that, from the very beginning, we've inherited this mortality that we're conscious of and we're terrified of dying. And that maps to why we neurotically cling, like why people are fist fighting over water, why people are running out of town. It's like we will do anything it takes to stay alive and to survive and to avoid death. And we're gripped by a fear of death that enslaves us to sin. And this is like what we've been called to be set free from. And why I think the call to come and die of Jesus is so important is because I think the nature of evil or sin is seductive. It's going to say, I can make you safe. I can make you special. I can make you strong. I can make you confident. I don't know, whatever. It's seducing you into something. But like you were implying and saying, I think explicitly, is like, but what the wandering eye will make you a slave. Yeah, sure. We're free to do whatever, but that doesn't make everything beneficial. It's all permissible, but it doesn't make it beneficial. Like there's a lot of things that we might want to say no to, things that are very normal lifestyle stuff that everyone has, like middle-class values, like a savings account, like safety, like security, like social security, like whatever those are, like, some investment in the future or whatever, because we've been like called to come and die. And in some way, I think that is a call to freedom, to be set free from the slavery that is implied by our fear of death, that is made real by our fear of death and how evil gets a grip on us. And anyway, just like to kind of bring that back to this idea of like what the gift of the apocalypse is, what the gift of grief is, I think it snaps a spell that we're under, and it gives us at least a moment to kind of make some different decisions and institute some different kind of choices.
Love it.
Yeah. So the conclusion of my thought, Paul was in this, it seems, the scriptures say, and then there's actually historical accounts of him. Who was the ruler that imprisoned him at the end of his life? Was it Nero?
Mm-hmm.
So he's in prison writing, and he basically says, everyone has left me. Like, I have no one left. I think the word he uses there is either betrayed or abandoned. Everyone has abandoned me. And he's asking this one guy, I think it was either Luke or John Mark, who maybe they've reconciled or something. He's like, it to me, it feels like one of the most despondent moments I could imagine for someone that's given their life to the mission of God. He's like, could you bring me a blanket?
Mhm.
Like, I don't need much, but I'd really like a blanket. I think it's hard to endure, man. Like, or guys, whoever's hearing this, we know it was awesome in your 20s. Everybody was in. We wanted to storm the gates of hell with truth and love and passion. And in your 30s, it's like you start to feel a little bit like an outsider. Like, okay, or actually, I would say, and John, you've seemed to have risen above this at times more than others, but I think you felt this way too. You start to feel a little irresponsible.
Yeah.
Like everybody else is getting their crap together. They're getting their 401k set up
Oh,
and
for sure.
and you're like, man, I'm
Behind.
behind the 8 ball on maturity.
I told you my financial assessment I had like 3 months ago.
Yeah, didn't they laugh at you?
Well, the guy just said, yeah, you're a bit behind. You're like $600,000 behind on your IRA. I said, well, like if I started now, what do I got to put away? He said about 6,000 a month. I'm like, okay, I'm
Good talk.
probably
Good talk.
past that.
Well, when you have those talks, you cannot help but go, did I make a mistake? And then I think, I don't know how old Paul was. Some would say he's in his 50s, 60s, maybe. But I think there does come a point where you go, I'm pretty alone in this. Like maybe I got some younger guys that are still like and I'm saying, hey, look, it's the same story that you believed in your 20s. Nothing changed.
Yeah.
The rock that he establishes his church on is still the gates of hell. We're still storm chasers. We're still, building our, what did Stud say? I want to build a rescue mission on the doorstep of hell. It's just, you're a lot lonelier than you were in a war. You feel right about what you're doing in part because so many others are doing it.
Yeah, everybody's doing it.
If you're the only one doing it, you're kind of a sociopath.
Yeah.
You're sort of a mass murderer.
Which I would argue is the primary purpose of the church.
Is what?
Is to help sociopaths find other sociopaths.
Let's title this episode.
No, that's what, because you described it. It's the wartime. Stu's behind the lines, doing a little training, replacing.
Yep.
And it's okay because we're all seeing we're a part of something. Church that is not a sociopathic connection point, a consumer might be the worst aberration of the story.
I do want to, I want to push back on the sociopathic thing, just out of like technically, because because technically
out of the psychological concept.
Yeah, because
sociopathy has a lot to do with an inability to have like empathy and sympathy, and to feel the needs around you. And I do think even, by the way, some of us might be that way psychologically. And so we need to embrace philosophical empathy, right? Do we go, we can still see and understand that hurts. And we want to like, and to mourn with those who mourn and celebrate with those who celebrate. But, I'm not 100% sure we're called to be sociopathic, but I do think even the sociopaths are called.
Think of a better psychological term, but I think we should call this episode Storm Chasing Life Under the Apocalyptic Freedom.
All right, rehearse that and remember it again. But for the
It's gone.
no, I got it. Storm
already-
chasing,
it's already gone.
life under the apocalyptic freedom.
Doesn't flow.
But the
very
sociopathic analogy is, so I just looked it up. It's obviously a mental health disorder. A person with a personality disorder manifesting itself in extreme antisocial attitudes and behavior and a lack of conscience.
well. Yeah, you're right. That's probably not what we're talking about.
Well, it's not. I don't see anything about empathy. I'm sure that's in there. I know that's
Conscience.
more.
That's conscience.
Yeah, but I know that's more falls into like the narcissistic sociopathic disorder. I more think about the inability to recognize the societal implications that your life standards should uphold to.
So we call that irresponsibility. And I actually think what's interesting is like the call to take responsibility in the kingdom will look like irresponsibility in the society.
For sure.
And that's really what we're getting at, is that it's a conscious decision though. It's an intentional ideal that every day feels like swimming upstream.
So we would, like, when we've talked about why we set up the Brave City Network, one of them was so that at some point someone would go, I'm not the only irresponsible person out here.
Yeah.
And we would say, keep being irresponsible. We're with you. We're also a little bit behind on our IRAs and our 401k, so it's okay.
It's not an excuse for laziness, for poor decision making. It's certainly not an excuse to not take care of your family. A man who cannot manage his own household has no business guiding the church in any way. It's more of a recognition of, look, we actually believe this man that called himself God. We actually believe him. And until you show us where he said that this was eternally irresponsible, we don't know any other way.
Mhm. Well, brother, we hope you guys figure out the next couple days and that God leads you guys to unique connections with folks and
Yeah, I hope so too, man. I hope so too. I mean, it's
Make
it's
some
a great
burritos.
opportunity to kind of be present for some folks and hopefully egg some others on into something that hopefully we
I do
can
think
make
we should
last.
try to get this episode out quicker, maybe if possible.
I can, yeah, I can release it immediately, even not even wait on.
Yeah, I think so. Hey, by the way, also season 2, Rewire University is stayed on as a sponsor. We're thankful for that. We want to keep reminding you guys, if you're looking for spiritual formation practices on the mission field for those that are active and specifically working in areas of great vulnerability, Rewire U is actually the best thing we've seen on like real-time spiritual formation help. So check them out, rewireu.com. And
Absolutely. And if anybody out there in the podcast verse is interested in sponsoring the Gray Pages podcast or being a part of it in any way, let us know.
do we have t-shirts that they get?
White t-shirts.
We don't have t-shirts yet. We should get some
Plain
t-shirts.
white t-shirts.